Okay. Καλησπέρα. Καλά είμαστε τώρα. Ωραία. Εξοχότατη κυρία Υπουργέ, εξοχότατη κυρία Υπουργέ, εξοχότατη κύριε Πρόεδρε, εξοχότατη κύριε Πρέσβης, αξιότιμε κυρία Γενικέ Διευθυντή, εκλεκτοί προσκεκλημένοι, κυρίες και κύριοι, σας καλωσορίζουμε θερμά και σας ευχαριστούμε για την παρουσία σας σήμερα. My name is Melissa Lefas, and on behalf of the Parthenon project, I have the privilege to welcome you to our event today on a win-win solution on the reunification of the Parthenon sculptures. It is my honor to welcome His Excellency Georgios Gerapetritis, Minister of Foreign Affairs, followed by Her Excellency Lina Mendoni, Minister of Culture, to deliver welcoming remarks. Thank you, ministers, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Dear friends, I start only with this because I consider you all as friends here. Let me speak in English so that we can all understand each other, which is slightly against the protocol, my dear minister, but I will do this in honor of our dear friends who are today joining us in this great event. When it comes to the Parthenon sculptures, which are now at the British Museum, I think there are two particular dimensions. There is a legal dimension and there is a political dimension. I would love to discuss about the legal dimension because I think that would be a very privileged area for me. Yet, I'm not going to speak about the legal aspects of it. I will speak in my capacity as foreign minister, and I have been engaged in this project for quite a long time, both from an academic point of view as well as from a political point of view. And what I would like to state is just a simple thing, that the reunification of the Parthenon sculptures is a unique case. It's an unprecedented case. It doesn't resemble to other cases of returning of artifacts. And I think this is the major difference against all other cases, which we should place emphasis upon. Because in that case, we have to consider that there is an artistic whole in Parthenon that we need to address. This is the key issue. It's a matter of reunification. It's not a matter of return. And we are speaking about artifacts which are essentially unsplittable. This is the major idea. I'm not concerned with whether there is a constitutional right for any person to enjoy the arts of ancient history or culture. I think this is a matter of personal belonging. What I'm claiming here is that the reunification is today a claim of ecumenical nature, and for this I think we should just all place emphasis upon. Why today? I think in the last few years there have been some very strong elements arguing in favor of the reunification of the Parthenon sculptures. First and above all, I would say that there is almost a high majority when it comes to popular opinion concerning this reunification, even within the United Kingdom. I take this very seriously. I think it's of utmost importance that today we're speaking about a popular demand to reunify the sculptures. And obviously, this is reasonable to happen here in Greece or in other parts of the world. But when it happens within the United Kingdom, I think it indicates that this is not a popular demand, but clearly an ecumenical demand. Secondly, we have a series of resolutions coming from UNESCO, the international organization, which is par excellence the forum where issues of cultural heritage are discussed. So I think this is also a very significant aspect. Thirdly, it's important that we have started, under the auspices of the Ministry of Culture, a series of returns of artifacts from other cosmopolitan-type museums, such as the Vatican Museum or the Antonio Salinas Museum of Palermo. This exactly reflects a broader idea that issues of cultural heritage needs to be in their birthplace. And last but not least, I think the most important argument comes from the very idea of having Acropolis Museum, one of the pieces of modern art which is undisputably among the most important worldwide. And I think the mere existence of the Acropolis Museum here in Athens by itself calls for the reunification. The truth is that for the last few years, we have been in constructive talks with the British Museum. This is an important aspect of our dialogue because, above all, I think it's important to have a mutual understanding about things, and it is important to understand each other's position. And we have these constructive talks with openness and sincerity. I think it is important to be open and to recognize each other's red lines. And we are doing this alongside with the Minister of Culture. And we have landed on some specific premises upon which we can build in order to come up with a strategic partnership. And this is the broader idea of what we're discussing today, a partnership that would eventually result in the sculptures coming back to their birthplace. I think it is important that we have a new government in the United Kingdom, a government which that we can discuss further about the logistics of the possible reunification. As you probably understand, it's not a matter of the government, of the British government, to just land on an agreement concerning the reunification of the sculptures, but it is essential that there is a political endorsement of any such agreement, and we are going to discuss about those issues. I think there is a relative optimism when it comes to a possible partnership that would also embrace other aspects apart from the reunification of the sculptures, which could be some joint ventures or foundations concerning the preservation of artifacts of antiquity, exchanges of artifacts in temporary exhibitions, and other joint projects concerning the awareness of the ancient Greek civilization. Cultural assets do not have to carry monetary value as long as it awakes a memory of or enlightens history. Geoffrey Robertson writes in his emblematic book, Who Owns History? And this is what I would like to reiterate. The Parthenon sculptures are essentially ecumenical, but they belong here. And it is absolutely different to have those sculptures here as opposed to even a cosmopolitan museum. And I realize that it has been for decades useful to have the sculptures in the British Museum where an individual or a group of people could just visit the sculptures and come across the evidence of ancient Greek antiquity. But today, with the Acropolis Museum and with the broader context of Athens, I think this is a spot where the artifacts should belong and should come back. Visiting the Parthenon sculptures in the British Museum is a viewing, whereas visiting those sculptures in the Acropolis Museum is an overall experience, a voyage to the past and optics for the future. Thank you so much.
Αγαπητοί φίλοι, κυρίες και κύριοι, εγώ θα μείνω στο πρωτόκολλο. Άλλωστε, για πολλά χρόνια είχα έναν υπουργό, ο οποίος μας έμαθε το πρωτόκολλο και μας το έμαθε σωστά. Ο Υπουργός Εξωτερικών νομιμοποιείται να μιλάει όποια γλώσσα θέλει. Ο Υπουργός Πολιτισμού στην Αθήνα πρέπει να μιλάει vox greca. Η ανάγκη της επανένωσης των γλυπτών του Παρθενώνα προκύπτει από την ιδιαιτερότητα και τη μοναδικότητά τους σε αντίθεση με άλλα λεηλατημένα καλλιτεχνικά έργα και μνημεία της παγκόσμιας πολιτιστικής κληρονομιάς που χαρακτηρίζονται από αυτοτελή, αυθύπαρκτη και ανεξάρτητη από το εκάστοτε φυσικό περιβάλλον υπόσταση. Θέλετε να... Τα γλυπτά του Παρθενώνα αποτελούν οργανικά και αναπόσπαστα μέρη ενός σύνθετου αρχιτεκτονήματος και καθολικού καλλιτεχνικού δημιουργήματος, τα οποία συναποτελούν με αυτό μία ενιαία και αδιαίρετη φυσική, αισθητική και νοηματική οντότητα. Ως όλων, το οικοδόμημα βρίσκεται σε άμεση διαλεκτική σχέση και συνάφεια με τα οικοδομήματα που το περιβάλλουν και που μαζί με αυτά συγκροτούν στο σύνολό τους μία αδιάσπαστη ενότητα, η οποία προσδιορίζεται και αναδεικνύεται από τον ίδιο το βράχο και το φυσικό τοπίο της Ακρόπολης των Αθηνών. Η ενότητα αυτή έχει συγκεκριμένο ιδεολογικό και νοηματικό υπόβαθρο. Εκπέμπει συγκεκριμένα μηνύματα και συμβολισμούς. Η απομάκρυνση των γλυπτών από το φυσικό τους περιβάλλον διαρριγνύει αυτή την ενότητα. Αποστερεί το ενιολογικό πλαίσιο που καθιστά δυνατή την κατανόηση και την ερμηνεία τους, διαστρεβλώνει και αλλοιώνει τα μηνύματα και τους συμβολισμούς του ίδιου του Παρθενώνα και ολόκληρου του μνημιακού συνόλου της Ακρόπολης. Όμως ο Παρθενώνας, εκτός από δημιούργημα μοναδικής καλλιτεχνικής σπουδαιότητας και αξίας, είναι ένα από τα σημαντικότερα και πλέον εμβληματικά μνημεία της ανθρωπότητας. Αναγνωρίζεται καθολικά ως το κατεξοχήν σύμβολο των θεμελιωδών αρχών και αξιών της παγκόσμιας κοινωνίας των πολιτών. Ιδιαίτερα μάλιστα των επιτευγμάτων του κλασικού ελληνικού πολιτισμού και της αθηναϊκής δημοκρατίας, που συνιστούν βασικά θεμέλια του ευρωπαϊκού και του δυτικού πολιτισμού. Είναι απολύτως σαφές ότι το ζήτημα της επανένωσης των γλυπτών του Παρθενώνα, πέρα από νομικό, τα είπε προηγουμένως εξαιρετικά ο Υπουργός Εξωτερικών, πέρα από νομικό, επιστημονικό και ηθικό, είναι ένα ζήτημα εξόχως πολιτικό. Η ελληνική πολιτεία δηλώνει συνεχώς την ειλικρινή πρόθεσή της να επεξεργαστεί δημιουργικές λύσεις προκειμένου η επανένωση των γλυπτών του Παρθενώνα στη γενέθλια γη, στο Μουσείο της Ακρόπολης, να μην δημιουργήσει κενό στις συλλογές και στο εκθεσιακό πρόγραμμα του Βρετανικού Μουσείου, προσφέροντας σε αντάλλαγμα περιοδικές εκθέσεις και δάνεια αρχαιοτήτων υψηλού κύρους, καλλιτεχνικής και ιστορικής σπουδαιότητας και αξίας, που θα διατηρούν αμείωτο και συνεχές το ενδιαφέρον του κοινού. Το αίτημα της Ελλάδας, με την υποστήριξη της διεθνούς κοινότητας για την επανένωση των γλυπτών του Παρθενώνα, έχει εισέλθει σε μία φάση κορύφωσης και ωριμότητας, κατά την οποία τα επιστημονικά, ιστορικά, νομικά και ηθικά ζητήματα έχουν πλέον απαντηθεί. Τα επιχειρήματα όλων των πλευρών έχουν εκτεθεί και αξιολογηθεί. Οι δικαιολογίες, οι προφάσεις και τα προσχήματα του παρελθόντος έχουν οριστικά καταλυθεί. Οι διεθνείς οργανισμοί και η παγκόσμια κοινωνία των πολιτών έχουν αποφανθεί. Το ίδιο και η μεγάλη πλειοψηφία του ίδιου του Βρετανικού λαού. Παραδοσιακοί πολέμοι της επιστροφής των γλυπτών έχουν μετατραπεί σε δεδηλωμένους υπέρμαχους της επανένωσής τους. Εν τω μεταξύ, έχουν μεσολαβήσει μερικά γεγονότα ιδιαίτερης σημασίας. Δεν θα τα επαναλάβω, τα είπε ο Υπουργός Εξωτερικών, η απόφαση της UNESCO το 2021, η επιστροφή του θραύματος Φέιγκαν ως deposit, ως κατάθεση, ως deposito. Αρχικά και εν τέλει ως οριστική επανένωση, η επιστροφή των θραυμάτων από το Βατικανό, η μαρτυρία της Τουρκίας για τη μη ύπαρξη του φυρμανιού, αυτό το οποίο επικαλούνται συνεχώς. Σήμερα βρισκόμαστε σε ένα κομβικό σημείο. Στη Μεγάλη Βρετανία υπάρχει μια κυβέρνηση των εργατικών, η Υπουργός Πολιτισμού της οποίας δηλώνει ότι εξετάζει τον επαναπατρισμό πολιτιστικών αγαθών. Το Βρετανικό Μουσείο έχει νέα διοίκηση που έχει κάθε λόγο να ακολουθήσει τις διεθνείς ηθικές αρχές. Στη Μεγάλη Βρετανία υπάρχουν αυτή τη στιγμή οι προϋποθέσεις για να γραφτεί μία ακόμα ιστορική σελίδα στις παραδοσιακά εξαιρετικά ισχυρές φιλικές σχέσεις των δύο χωρών και των δύο λαών, του Βρετανικού και του Ελληνικού. Η Μεγάλη Βρετανία έχει τη δυνατότητα να διαμορφώσει μία νέα συνθήκη στην παγκόσμια πολιτιστική ιστορία. Τα ωφέλη θα είναι τεράστια, όχι μόνο για την Ελλάδα και την Αγγλία, αλλά για ολόκληρη την ανθρωπότητα, σύμβολο της οποίας είναι ο Παρθενώνας. Ευχαριστώ. Θα έχετε τώρα και τη μετάφραση αγγλικά.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to stick to the protocol, according to my predecessor, who used to stay in the protocol. The Minister of Foreign Affairs may speak in any language he wishes, wearing his hat, but the Minister of Culture in Athens may speak in Vox Graeca. The need to reunify the sculpture of the Parthenon comes from the specialty and the uniqueness of these artifacts, contrary to other looted monuments of worldwide cultural heritage that are characterized as independent and totally different from the natural entity they are in. For the sculpture of the Parthenon, they are organic and integral parts of a complicated artifact of universal creation that are an integral aesthetic and sensorial entity. As a whole, the whole structure is in direct dialectic relationship and cohesion with its surrounding, and all of them, they do create an integral part that is defined and highlighted by the sacred rock of the Acropolis and the natural landscape of the Acropolis of Athens. This entity has a specific ideological and very important background. It conveys specific messages and symbols. Taking away the sculpture from their natural environment breaks this entity, breaks this whole. It deprives of any conceptual framework that renders possible the understanding and the interpretation of the sculpture. It alters the messages and symbols of the Parthenon itself and as a whole of the Acropolis monument. Yet, the Parthenon, apart from a creation of unique artistic significance and values, and one of the most iconic monuments in mankind, is acknowledged as the symbol par excellence of the paramount principles and values of the global civil society. Furthermore, we could say that there are the well-known achievements of the classic Hellenic culture, the Athenian democracy, that are the pillars of the European and Western civilization. It's quite clear that the questions of the Reunification of the sculpture of the Parthenon is, apart from a legal one, scientific, moral, but above all, a political question. The Hellenic Republic has stated that it is willing, sincerely, to process creative solutions to reunify the sculptures of the Parthenon in its birthplace, and not to create any gap in the collections or the exhibitions of the British Museum, offering, as a return, some artifacts for periodic exhibitions or lending antiquities of high prestige, of artistic and historic importance and value that will keep intact the interest of the public. The claim of Greece to support, along with the support of the international community, to reunify the sculptures of the Parthenon has become mature enough. According to these status, there are scientific, legal, historic, and other questions that have been already replied. The arguments of all sides have been expressed and evaluated. The justifications, the pretext, or any other arguments of the past have belong in history. International organizations and worldwide community and civil society have taken a very important decision. The same goes for the vast majority of the British people itself. Traditional enemies of the return of the sculptures have now become the supporters of reunification. Moreover, we have had some milestones, such as the resolution of UNESCO in 2021, the Thangam fragment return, the return of the Vatican artifacts, as well as the well-known Turkish declaration about the non-existence of the Sultan's decision. Today, we are in a pivotal point. In Great Britain, there's a new government, Labour one, and a new Minister of Culture who says that she might examine a repatriation of cultural assets. The British Museum has a new administration that has every reason to follow the international moral principles and values. In Great Britain, right now, there are the preconditions to write yet a historic page in the traditional, very well-established relationships between our two countries' peoples, the British one and the Greek one. Great Britain has the possibility to shape a new condition in the worldwide cultural history. The benefits will be huge, not just for Greece or the UK, but for the whole mankind, the symbol of which is the Parthenon. Thank you.
Thank you, ministers, for your passionate and tireless efforts to see the Parthenon sculptures return to their birthplace. To present the Parthenon project and the 4 core elements of the win-win solution, it's my great pleasure to introduce the founder and my father, Yannis Lefas.
Καλησπέρα. Είναι χαρά μου να δω φίλους παλιούς και να κάνουμε καινούριους φίλους εδώ. I'm going to speak in English, you know, so I've been away for a few years, but still my accent is very strong, so please carry on. Good evening and thank you for joining us today. Together with my family, we founded Lefas Humanitas, a non-profit organization dedicated to advancing philanthropic, educational, and cultural initiatives that enrich our communities with specific focus to Greece and the Hellenic culture. The Parthenon project is one of our projects. It started very small, but became very big. By nature of many people supported us. We have a lot of supporters. Everywhere we speak to people, we get a lot of interest. I'm personally deeply interested in the matter of the Parthenon sculptures. Some years before, the Greek government had commissioned a legal opinion to explore the possibility of pursuing an international case for the return to Athens. Geoffrey Robertson, King's Counsel, the late Professor Norman Palmer and Amal Clooney were part of this legal team tasked with preparing the legal opinion. We're grateful to have my dear and learned friend, Geoffrey Robertson, on the panel today. Inspired by reading a brief of his opinion and eager to continue to this important cause, I reached out to Geoffrey and discussed the topic with him to explore the opportunities. This was the nascent start of our campaign. Following conversation with Geoffrey, we decided that it would be beneficial to preserve this work by synthesizing the historical facts and moral and legal aspects of this issue for the general public to public's understanding. To achieve this, we supported the publication of a book written by Geoffrey, titled Hon's History, which makes the compelling legal case for returning the Parthenon sculptures. This marked the first phase of our campaign, which focused on the legal and moral arguments. Numerous copies of the book were sold globally, which is of course a testament to Jeff's exceptional knowledge of the matter and interest on the case. At that time, the Greek government had decided, and it is still of the opinion, that not to pursue the legal path. We also feel that that was the right decision. With the publication of Geoffrey's book, we were equipped with the legal aspects of the issue, but we recognized the need to emphasize the ethical and moral dimensions. And that is what we did. We directed our focus to highlight the ethical justifications for the return of the initiated efforts to raise public awareness in the UK through collaboration with artists, advocacy campaigns. Mr. Stephen Fry is a great supporter of us, and he's done many things to support the case. Of course, this commitment to advocacy for the return of the Parthenon sculptures has deep roots, stretching back to Lord Byron and to the renowned era of the legendary Melina Mercouri, Greek icon and cultural minister in the 1980s. Since then, countless individuals and organizations were passionately advocating the return of the sculptures. We recognize that the support for the sculpture return comes from various groups in Greece, the UK, the Greek diaspora in the US, Canada, and Australia, as well as freelance and support us worldwide, and we thank them. The Parthenon project. This is our revolution, our odyssey. Αυτή είναι η ανάπτυξη, είναι μια οδύσσια. Ξεκίνησε από νομική approach, νομική... Okay. Then moved to moral justification. We created awareness for the issue and have been receiving support from many corners of the world. But the theory and the mechanism had to be devised to deliver the desired results. This was the context in which the current stage of our campaign began to take shape. While the legal and the moral aspects of the issue are crucial, and what seems to be the two sides of the same coin, we understand that those efforts alone were not enough. In a way, they're in a zero-sum game, where what one party wins, the other party loses. We needed to evolve into something more comprehensive, effective, and ambitious. If we were serious about reunifying the sculptures in Greece, it became clear that we needed to present a new model and exert influence on key dimension makers to seek alignment and a pragmatic approach to the issue. To this end, in 2022, we evolved to the third phase of our campaign, as it is today, under the name Parthenon Project, which aims to reunify the Parthenon sculptures in Athens through what we refer to as a win-win solution, which will benefit both countries, Greece and the UK, and I venture to say the whole world. To develop and promote this win vision, we assembled our team in London, which consists of top lobbying and public relations firms, as well as political advisors and legal experts specializing in the return of cultural heritage objects. We create an exceptional advisory board consisting of influential political, legal, and cultural figures both in the UK and Greece. Our advisory board is chaired by former Conservative Party Culture Minister Lord Ed Vaizey, he's here, and Constitution scholar Professor Nikos Alivizatos, both of us are with us today. Oxford University Professor Stathis Kalivas, former Labour Party Culture Secretary Sir Brett Bradshaw, member of the House of Lords Lord Michael Dobbs and Baroness Catherine Meyer, actor and writer Stephen Fry, journalist and former deputy editor of the Sunday Times Sarah Baxter. Each member brings their own expertise and influence to the table, allowing us to amplify our message, engage stakeholders to the highest levels, and advocate for a meaningful solution in a unified voice. Through our collective efforts, we crafted a proposal for the reunification of the Parthenon sculptures. This proposal embodied an ideal, a vision of what we believe to be the perfect foundational agreement between Greece and the United Kingdom, which will ensure that both parties stood to win, a golden ratio, μια χρυσή τομή, if you will. The pillars of our campaign. As part of our Parthenon project win-win vision, we proposed an ambitious long-term cultural partnership agreement between Greece and UK, which stands on 4 core pillars. The first one, the Parthenon sculptures of the British Museum will be permanently unified in their birthplace city of Athens, with those sculptures displayed in the Acropolis Museum as complete artistic works and consistent with its creator's vision. The second, for this cultural partnership to be effective, our campaign proposes a forward-looking approach to the debate, where both sides may agree to disagree, and acknowledge that they do not currently share an agreed position on the ownership of the sculptures. And I think our friends here, they're going to work more on this, explore more on this. Third, to support this cultural partnership, to ensure the longevity for the benefit of future generations, a joint Greek-British foundation will be established. Such a foundation will engage supporters and donors from around the world to fund a long-term program of research, curation, scholarships, and wider educational and cultural activities in the UK and Greece, as well as grants to museums from both countries. Under such an agreement, Greek masterpieces will be sent to the British Museum for world-class exhibitions. These treasures will be showcased in a new and modern gallery, the former Duvin Gallery, I call it former because I'm jumping the gun here a bit, to be renamed the Prince Philip Hellenic Gallery, paying homage to Prince Philip and his Greek roots. As part of our vision, the gallery will host Greek artifacts of various periods, as pre-classic, classic, Macedonian, Hellenistic, Byzantine, even modern, that have never been seen outside the UK, inspiring museum visitors to explore a modern Greek museum right in the heart of London. The cultural partnership we have been promoting between the two countries has in fact resonated with the British public. There is now a groundswell of support and increased awareness among the British public for the support of the partnership we're proposing. The conditions are now ideal for this type of cultural partnership. For the first time in decades, there is a genuine constructive dialogue between both sides focused on future rather than the past. And the ministers told us about these discussions. The stars are aligned. We have visionary progressive leadership at the Acropolis Museum with Professor Nikos. The British public overwhelming supports our cause. The British Museum is under new leadership of Nicholas Callinan, a dynamic director known for his visionary long-term approach and fundraising prowess, who will oversee the complete reimagining of the museum, and the UK new government has publicly stated it will not stand in the way of any potential agreement between Greece and the British Museum. It is clear that the possibility of reunifying the sculptures is closer than ever before, and these developments could well pave the way for what George Osborne, chair of the British Museum, said that he termed it the Parthenon partnership. The Parthenon project is called a project because it has a clear beginning, middle, and end. At its heart is a cultural partnership built upon the four fundamental pillars, which we believe have the power to benefit both sides and generations to come. This partnership offers a win-win solution, as we see it, which will finally unify the Parthenon sculptures in their rightful home and bring an end to this long-standing cultural debate. Thank you. Ευχαριστώ.
It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our fantastic panelists today. To my left is, of course, Geoffrey Robertson, King's Counsel, a renowned human rights advocate, and the architect, one of the architects of the legal case for the return of the Parthenon sculptures to Greece. Next, we have Lord Vaizey, former Culture Minister for the Conservative government, and now a member of the House of Lords and chair of the Parthenon Project. To his left is Thangam Debbonaire, former Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sports with the UK's Labour Party. And last but certainly not least, our own Professor Nikos Alivizatos, a constitutional scholar, emeritus professor at the University of Athens, and an esteemed member of the Parthenon Project Board. Ed, I'd like to kick it off with you. You are the UK's longest-serving culture minister from 2010 through 2016, so certainly you've wrestled in that role with the question of the reunification of the Parthenon sculptures. What drew you back to this issue to take on the role as chair of the Parthenon Project?
Well, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question because I appear as a footnote in Geoffrey's book. That's the biggest role I play in this saga before today, but it's a very ignominious footnote because I wrote a letter as the Minister of Culture in 2015 to UNESCO explaining the British government's immovable position on the ownership of the sculptures. And I guess I'm in repentance mode and have been for the last few years, because it's only in the last few years that I really gave this matter a huge amount of thought. And I think it's instructive to think about why I've moved my position so that you understand the status quo in Britain and how we can change it. Because there is a degree of opinion among the British establishment that the sculptures belong to the British and that they were bought legitimately and they should be in the British Museum. And it takes a while for people to move from that position. And at the time, at the British Museum, the director, Neil McGregor, a very distinguished man, had this mantra that the British Museum was a world museum, and therefore it didn't really matter where any objects came from because the British Museum was open to the world, and therefore these objects were available for the world to see. And it didn't really suit me as a culture minister to have a big row with the director of the British Museum, who was a much more distinguished person than I was. So really what I'm saying in very many words is what I could have said in 2 words, which is the status quo is the easiest place for a British minister or indeed a British government to be. But I think that the Parthenon project, which engaged me 2 or 3 years ago to come and see the Acropolis Museum and to see, to really kind of get a feel for the atmosphere in Athens helped me change my mind. And the more that I've looked at this issue and the more involved I've become, the more passionate I've been about the opportunity to reunify the sculptures. And I would take it in two stages from my perspective. The first stage is simply the argument about whether or not the sculptures should be reunified. And I thought your very distinguished culture minister, who, by the way, for the benefit of the foreign minister, she has the best job in the Greek government. Being the culture minister in any government is by far the best job. The key, that's British sense of humour, bear with me. The key is, this is a unique and incredible work of art that in many ways, because of its influence, belongs to the world, has shaped world culture. Should it be reunified? Well, of course it should. It's absurd that it is cut in two and resides in two places. So that question to me is literally unanswerable. You cannot come up with any other answer. And then if you say, well, where should it be? Should we move the sculptures from the Acropolis to the British Museum, or should we move the sculptures from the British Museum to the Acropolis Museum? 99% of people, or perhaps 100% of sane people, would say it's fairly obvious that the sculptures should move in this direction. And that means that the British Museum can give a great gift to the world of reunifying this unique piece of art. So that's issue number one. But issue number two for me is to give, I think, great credit to John Lefas and the Parthenon project, because a lot of the ideas that John has espoused in his remarks did not come from me. They came from a collective group of people working together to discuss ideas. And this is this idea of a win-win. And what is so exciting for me is it takes it beyond a simple transaction. It doesn't simply say, let's right a wrong, let's reunify the sculptures, the job is done. It suddenly becomes an incredible leaping off point for a fantastically enriched, deepened relationship between Britain and Greece, who are already countries that have a huge and long distinguished history together. So this idea of Greek artifacts that perhaps have never left Athens before, going on display in the British Museum, if you trust them, going on display at the British Museum is a win-win. Because if the British Museum is a museum of the world and millions of people go and see it, then they will see these unique artifacts in context, and the British Museum already has a great collection as well. It means that, and we'll talk about the foundation in more depth later, the opportunity to use the stewardship of a reunified Parthenon sculpture in Athens as a way of supporting scholarship into the sculptures and that period of Greek history between British scholars and Greek scholars, and indeed scholars all over the world, is a hugely exciting opportunity. And the opportunity as well, once a wrong has been righted for the Greek diaspora and Greeks here, to support the British Museum in its Hellenic scholarship as well, will be also very exciting. So for me, it comes in two stages. It took me a while, I'm not that bright, to work out that there is an unanswerable point about the sculptures being reunited and being reunited in Athens. But it's made me even more excited to get involved in this debate, because I see the incredible opportunity that lies ahead for the Greeks and the British to work together in a much more exciting way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and we are really thrilled to have you on this side and as chair of the project. Geoffrey, as John elaborated, you developed the robust legal arguments for the reunification of the Parthenon sculptures as you've laid out in your book, Who Owns History? Now, the recently elected British Prime Minister was in your chambers as a barrister, so you know him well. And his government has been quite clear that they would not get in the way of a deal struck by the British Museum. So it seems we're headed in the direction towards a political deal. What are your views on this?
The only advice I gave Keir Starmer was not to take a knighthood, which of course he immediately did. But yes, the government will allow the British Museum to lead. But given the lies and dishonesty that have been shown over the years by the British Museum, you've got to take that with a grain of salt. Look, the Parthenon marbles are the only existent wonder of the ancient world that still is with us. You go and see the frieze, and here are people walking, talking in a procession, arguing, playing sport, 2,500 years ago in the first democratic society that was ever devised. And it's like, they're doing a lot of drinking as well, I'm glad to say, but they are nonetheless living again after all that time. And it's like tearing up an ancient picture, tearing it in half, by having so much in the gloomy room dedicated or supplied by a famous, infamous art forger, Lord Duveen, and the wonderful venue that awaits them in the New Acropolis Museum under the shadow of the Parthenon with the blue Attic sky above. And that's where they should be, and that's where it is appropriate to be, and that is where they can best be appreciated. There's a wonderful description by Joan Connolly, a famous American art historian, who says, "The wholeness of the Parthenon demands our respect and warrants our every effort to reunify it such as we can. Let us for a moment consider the state of the central figures of the pediment. Poseidon's shoulders are held in London, while his pectoral and abdominal muscles remain in Athens. Athena's battered head, neck, and right arm are displayed in the New Acropolis Museum, while her right breast remains in the British Museum. This deliberate and sustained dismemberment of what are some of the most sublime images ever carved by humankind brings shame on those who work to uphold this state of affairs." Now, that, I think, is exactly the words, shame, on the British Museum, which has perpetrated a number of lies which are now can be called out. 3 lies in particular. One, that Elgin had a license, a firman, from the Sultan, because even in these days you couldn't destroy a temple, an occupying power, just as Israel was occupying power in Gaza. Not an occupying power was not in international law allowed to destroy or give away a temple of the occupied, unless there was an authority, a license from the top. There wasn't. The claim that Elgin made in 1816 when he testified to parliamentary committee was that he had a firman from the Sultan. There was never a firman. Historians have absolutely destroyed that argument. All there was a letter from someone in high office, but not the Sultan, to the 2 governors of the 2 Turkish governors of Athens, one the civil governor, one the military governor, who were denying Elgin's workmen the opportunity to go on the Acropolis. And they were told, you should allow our friendly ambassador, Lord Elgin, allow his workmen to sketch. They wanted to sketch. They wanted to take molds and to pick up some of the pieces of statuary that had fallen to the ground as a result of a previous mishap. Now, that was the limit of Elgin's, which the British Museum have tried to pretend that it was a license to rip the monuments off the wall, off the temple wall. it wasn't. So that's the first lie that it has been nailed. The second lie, which is promoted at the moment in the Duveen room, where the British Museum hoard is stored, is that Elgin rescued the marbles. He told the committee, he came to Athens and saw the way the Turks, the terrible Turks, were selling off the marbles. He saw that they were using them for target practice, and that was when he decided to rescue them for posterity. That's what he told the committee in 1816, and what the British Museum is earnestly peddling. The man was the saviour of the marbles. You read it all round the Duveen Gallery. And it's an utter lie, you know, because Elgin's team began their destructive work, tearing the statues off the temple walls, cutting them in half to get them down, and storing them hiding them in the home of the British consul until they could be put on ships, often British naval ships, and sent back to Downing Street. Well, the truth is that Elgin started this despoliation in August of 1801. Elgin did not come to Athens until June 1802. So his evidence to the Select Committee was an utter lie. He was not in Athens when the despoliation started, and his stories of acting from what he saw to act as their saviour are absolutely untrue. But the third lie that the British Museum tells is that the marbles were legitimately obtained, that they were lawfully and properly obtained. Well, you've got to go back to the testimony offered in 1816 to the Select Committee, where Elgin's agent, who organised this whole exercise, gave evidence. And he was a cleric. He was the Reverend Hunt. He came from his little parish 50 miles outside London to give evidence of what happened. And his evidence is as clear as daylight. Those marbles were obtained by bribery and corruption. And he organised the bribery and corruption. He said to the committee that he gave inducements and presents to the military governor and to the civil governor. And he said mainly of money, sometimes of horses, gold watches, telescopes, silver snuff boxes, and expensive items of clothing from London tailors. A splendid set of dueling pistols. Devious cleric says that, admitted that he used these English items as bribes. This was the mess of pottage for which Greek, the essence of Greekness, as Melina Mercury put it, was sold. And also, to quote from his evidence, brilliant cut-glass lustres, some horses and clothing, telescopes, firearms, and other articles of English manufacture, such as gold watches and snuff boxes, and there were cash payments for every piece of sculpture, estimated £45, £65, many thousands of pounds in today's money. So there is unimpeachable evidence that the Parthenon marbles were acquired by bribery and corruption at a time when English judges were just beginning in commercial law, Lord Mansfield, beginning to say that corruption of this kind could not be countenanced. Today, it's an irreplaceable rule that if you acquire goods by corruption, you can't sue because you're corrupt. And this was plainly corrupt. There is no way that a court today could say that this was other than obtained by bribery and corruption. So I have no doubt that this being the evidence, it is entirely wrong for the museum to maintain still that these are, that Elgin properly acquired or legitimately acquired the marbles. He didn't. So if we go, I've been saying this to the Greek government, various Greek governments, if the International Court of Justice were enlisted, and you do it not by Greece taking the case, but by Greece encouraging other countries to vote at the General Assembly to refer the issue to the International Court of Justice, then you will succeed, because it will rule that wrongfully obtained heritage, cultural heritage, should be restored, reunited, and that the marbles must be united. But I can see that would be a great case, and Greece and so many other countries, you have no idea, so many other countries would want their cultural property back, and particularly back from Britain, which had a dreadful colonial record of war crimes, seizing the property of indigenous people and not returning them. Well, that's one way to go. But isn't it better that these two great countries who've got a record ever since the Battle of Navarino, which won Greece its freedom, was led by Britain. There were one or two other ships, but it was essentially the British Navy that defeated the Ottomans and gave Greece the opportunity to be independent. And the very first 1836 request that Greece, the King of Greece, made was for the return of the marbles, and that request has been made consistently. But there was a point, a remarkable piece of history that we uncovered, Amal Clooney actually uncovered it, when the Foreign Office considered this after the Second World War. They considered it fully, and they decided that as a matter of justice, the marbles must go back. The right place for them was Athens, and in particular, because Britain and Greece were the only two countries in Europe at the end that fought Hitler. And that seems to me an unassailable bond that should unite Greece and Britain, the only two countries in Europe that fought the Nazis, and eventually, with American help and Russian help as well, won. So why be at loggerheads anymore? The Parthenon project certainly, I think, will be supported by the British government if the museum agrees to it, and by showing the lies that the museum has told in the past, which are clear, I don't think it will have any right or any feet to stand on in opposing the Parthenon project. So for the first time, and I was brought in to advise the Greek government, a different government, back in 2012. For the first time, I do feel optimistic that things have moved, that Britain will do the right thing because it's right in morality and it's right in justice. And so I would endorse the Parthenon project as a way of avoiding the sword of Damocles of a case at the International Court of Justice that can still be held over the museum's head.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. And your endorsement of the win-win solution is very meaningful, especially, of course, the campaign is forward-looking. It is ambitious. It seeks to provide great opportunity for these great allies that you've described. I'd like to head over a little down the ways here to Thangam. I understand this is your first time to Greece. Welcome. You had the opportunity to visit the Acropolis and its dedicated museum today. Can you share with us some of your impressions of Athens, of the Acropolis, of the Parthenon sculptures, in the context of the win-win solution and the cultural partnership that you've heard discussed today?
Well, Melissa, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody, friends, ministers, colleagues. It's a real honour to be here. And I have to say, I feel like I'm coming in on this story at the very tail end, and it's a very, very long story. I'm going to end with the end of my story, which is it's time that we got to the end of the story. These sculptures should have been home a long time ago, but we now have an opportunity. And I feel haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure I'm not a footnote in Geoffrey's book. I don't think I'm a footnote in Ed's book. I'm barely a footnote in my own book. But I remember when I first heard about these sculptures was from a book as a child, when I was about 8, so 50 years ago. And it feels quite extraordinary this morning to be in front of them and seeing something that I'd thought about and actually visited in the British Museum, which is almost literally my local museum, and in Islington, where I live in London. So it's quite exciting to see where they're supposed to be, where their home is, and to see the completion of the story is almost there. It's so close. And to be able to stand next to a gap in a museum and know what should be there. So thank you, Professor, for sharing that with us, and also for sharing with me your wonderful book, which I spent the afternoon studying. It's a really beautiful thing, and it's an incredible honour for all of us on this table to have stood there this morning, to have seen some of the great works of art of the world, of the history of the civilised world, in the seat of democracy, which as a politician and as a recently beaten politician, I've had to say many times to people, you can't love democracy a bit. You can only love it completely, whether you win or lose, whether you're part of it or not, whether you're in Athens or London. And as a politician, my role and my tiny footnote in my own story, which is part of this big story, is that the policy of the Labour Party was a very simple one that I came up with. It was very, very simple, so it won't take me long to read out. In fact, I don't even have to read it. I remember saying it multiple times on the television the day that our now Prime Minister received the Greek Prime Minister a few months ago. And it is that we as politicians, and the Labour Party's position, is that the British Museum and the Greek authorities are more than capable of coming up with a solution. And that was it. And we knew that that would be the case. Now, I didn't think it would come about this quickly. So when John from the Parthenon Project rang me up when I was still a recovering politician, and then Melissa and I met last week in New York when I have to say my recovery was fully complete, I thought this is an incredible way to be a former Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, because it matters that it is not the existing politicians who are here. It matters to me that I was part of creating that policy, a simple policy for our current government and our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, to support. But it matters more to me to have been with you this morning under the blue sky of Athens, in the seat of democracy, saying you can't half love democracy and you can't half love a work of art, and you can't love half a work of art when you know where the other half is, and there is a home sitting I don't know which way, sitting there waiting for it. You just can't love half of it. And I do love half of it because I've been near it. And now I've been near its home. And just as you should not remove anybody from their home, we should bring these sculptures home. The time is now. There is an opportunity. I felt very emotional to be part of it with you this morning. And I feel really quite emotional to be here with you all, dear friends, this evening, to know that we are near the end of the first part of this, the middle part of the story, and its great future. The next story will begin. So thank you so much for making me part of it.
Thank you, Thangam, for the energy that you bring to this. The experience in the museum really does imbue a clear answer. And we're also really thrilled to have a cross-party delegation with us on this panel today. I'd like to now turn to a central part of the win-win solution that has been a stumbling block for the return of the Parthenon sculptures for decades now. And that is, of course, that Greece and Britain would agree to disagree on the question of ownership, while ensuring that the entire collection of the Parthenon sculptures return and reach their permanent home here at the Acropolis Museum. For this, I welcome Professor Nikos Alivizatos. Can you please explain how the agree to disagree principle would work?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address this specific audience, and especially you. Taking into consideration that for the British, the acquisition of the marbles were legitimate, while for the Greeks, illegitimate, to put it mildly, and the positions of the two sides cannot approach. It is obvious that a principle separates the two. The idea of the win-win solution was to set aside the ownership issue and have a very pragmatic, a very realistic approach. The Minister of Culture, just before we started, informed me that there is a precedent. The precedent of the Thangam, which is, if I may say it in very simple words, the crucial word is deposit. We should translate this word in Greek as parakatathiki. It is not just a word. It is a concept included in our civil code, Article 822, which comes from Roman law. And if I may read it, it's very short. By virtue of a contract of deposit, the depository receives a movable, so it has to be a movable, from another person, the depositor, for safekeeping under the obligation to return it upon demand. Remuneration can only be claimed if it is agreed or inferred from the circumstances. So what is extremely important to note about the definition of parakatathiki, of the deposit, is that the depositor under Roman and Greek law does not have to be the owner. So if we sign an agreement which qualifies that transaction as a deposit, we do not automatically recognize the quality of the owner to the depositor. As you may very easily understand, this solves many problems. The only legal obligation which arises out of that agreement is the trustees, the depository's obligation to return the items upon request. So, legally speaking, through the solution proposed by Geoffrey in his project, to approach the issue. We can leave aside the ownership issue and proceed. For the time being, this would be my only contribution to this panel.
I just wanted to come in with another piece of history. Just a very short one, and in many ways very different, and yet there's some good parallels. Also, when I was a child, we thought in those days in the United Kingdom that there would never, ever be peace on the island of Ireland, that Northern Ireland and the British, and that there would be permanent conflict between two sides on Northern Ireland, between Ireland and with the United Kingdom. Nobody thought it was possible. And it only became possible because several really thoughtful people were determined that it must be so, and were prepared to talk, were prepared to risk actually a huge amount to be able to listen to very hard things from a side that they didn't really agree with at all, but also, and this is why I wanted to pick up on something you said there, that because they were prepared to believe that there was a win-win solution, that one was out there somewhere, because the alternative was lose-lose. And if you know that the alternative is lose-lose, and in this case with art, it is lose-lose because art has been broken apart and there is a home for it, you have to believe in win-win, and you have to, we have to, our two countries have to agree that we may disagree on the way we tell our different parts of this story, and that's enough if the story gets the sculptures home. You know, God loves a sinner who repents, and there's going to be a lot of repenting. Ed's already told about his repenting. And I think this is a good way for this story to continue, is to allow each other to tell our stories in a different way, because if we do that, if we have that repenting on our side, from some, from others there will be none. But so long as the story ends with the sculptures coming home, that's the win-win solution. That's the path that you have shown us, and you've given us another example of, which I think is so important. So sorry, thank you for letting me add that, Melissa.
Absolutely, and I think it's about telling our story and also laying the foundations for our future. And that's where I wanted, if I could come back to you, Ed, underpinning the cultural partnership is this idea of a foundation governed by equal number of representatives of Greek and UK representatives. What is the vision of the foundation, if you could unpack that for us?
So the foundation was an idea that emerged from discussions among the members of the Parthenon project, and I think it's a very exciting idea, and I think Lord Michael Dobbs in particular deserves a lot of credit for this. And you may have come across Lord Dobbs. He's a very famous author. I've now completely forgotten what his book was called, but I'm sure it was, what was it called? It was anyway, televised on Netflix. It made Netflix. Anyway, House of Cards, that's it. So he came up with this idea of a foundation, and I think it's a very interesting idea, because actually the point about this being a new start in terms of the British-Greek relationship as far as the sculptures are concerned, I think is embodied in the foundation, and indeed by John's proposal earlier in his remarks about having a Prince Philip gallery at the British Museum and the exchange of artifacts. And I think as well it recognises that while, as we say, the case for the sculptures returning to Athens is unanswerable, there is nevertheless, whether we like it or not, a history of the last 200 years of the sculptures being in London, and also obviously the massive impact they had on British culture in the 19th century, and the rise of Hellenism and architecture and so on and so forth. So the foundation idea is that the foundation is a joint project between the British and the Greeks, between the British Museum and perhaps the Acropolis Museum, where people are able to raise money in order to support scholarships and research into the history of the sculptures, but also into the relationships between the British and the Greeks, artistic relationships that have existed for such a huge period of time. And we could support young scholars who want to do this research and really build a real foundation that has a huge legacy going forward, where you end up with a huge alumni class of scholars who have benefited from scholarships and have contributed to research, who become, as it were, great supporters of the sculptures once they're reunited and back in Athens. So it's a living, breathing organization that would underpin what would be a very exciting moment in our history when the sculptures are reunited and remind people of the great endeavor that brought that about.
Thank you. And our hope is that this focus on scholarship, on curation, will also benefit young people, the next generations, to continue that exchange. Final question, back to you, Thangam, if I may. You've had many discussions with the museum sector in the UK and with the British Museum. Can you give us any more insights on their vision, and what does Greece might gain from that?
I think we are at a time of change. So there's a change of leadership at the top of the British Museum. There's a change of leadership in the United Kingdom government. That gives us an opportunity to start telling that story in a different way. And what's in it for the Greek people? I think it would be shameful of me to say, you get the sculptures back because they should always be here. They should have been here many, many years ago. So I'm not going to say that. What I am going to say is I think having the Prince Philip Hellenic Gallery in the British Museum under a new leadership in a country that's telling our story in new ways is a fantastic opportunity for both our countries to show our allyship, to explore our history in new ways, and museums change. Museums should change. That empty space that you showed me this morning will one day not be empty. In Bristol, 4 years ago, something happened that was really momentous and is now in a different way in a museum. It was a statue of a slave trader. And I had campaigned for that slave trader, Colston, that statue to be removed. And it finally came down as what legally was an act of vandalism. But morally, and I was in communication with the police at the time because I was the Member of Parliament, was inescapable that it should no longer be there. And then the city took part in that conversation, that study, that theorising and thinking about, well, what should we do with the story of this statue? How can we tell our story in a new way? The statue was not destroyed, it was represented, but in a different way. Statues can change their location, and they often need to for different reasons. But the story then has to change with them, and the research and collaboration that Ed has so well outlined, I think that's a really special part of where museums are going. And I know that from talking to museum directors, that they see this as a time of change for museums generally. There's a real opportunity to learn.
Thank you so much. I'd like to really extend my deep gratitude to the entire panel for your reflections today. We just have a little bit of time before the end of our program for 1 or 2 questions or interventions, should we have any. At the very back. I think we'll project.
Is it on? No. My question is for former Status Secretary, Ms. Debbonaire. Picking up or following up on a part of your speech about how the Parthenon is split in different parts. During one of his recent visits to the United Kingdom, the Greek Prime Minister, Mr. Mitsotakis, compared the Parthenon to the Mona Lisa, saying that a piece of art cannot be dispersed in different museums around the world and displayed in effectively not the state it was meant to. So I was just interested to hear your thoughts on the comparison.
Thank you for that question. I think the critical thing here is if the Mona Lisa, where it currently is, was split in two, when it has a home, everyone would think that was absurd. When I saw the video that I think the Parthenon project had been behind of dividing up Stonehenge, which is a scheduled monument in my country, and taking it to Greece to look after a bit of it, that would be absurd. And that was part of the humour. Making the point with humour was, I think, really appropriate. But this is a serious point because there is a serious home for serious sculptures, great works of art. It's, for me, I think that it's even bigger than can you tear up a painting? I mean, by the way, nobody should tear up paintings, neither should they throw soup at paintings. But we should be bringing sculptures that have a home to their home. And that really makes, that sort of speaks to me, that comparison that the Prime Minister made, that was beautifully done, because it is a painting, referring to a painting that we all know what it looks like, and we all know where it lives, it has a home. That's the comparison for me. I thought it was a really helpful one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, and I think we have someone just next to you, next to the microphone.
There's a lady there at the third row.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello, my name is Hellenic. I belong to BCI Media Canada and Association of European Journalists. So actually, what would be the first steps in aim to bring this culture justice among our countries, but in the most effective way, in order to bring the awareness to the people? Thank you.
What was the question?
Can you restate the question? Sorry.
Yes. So what would be the first realistic steps in order to strive bridges among our two cultures, to our two countries, to bring the awareness to the people? Thank you.
Yes, Nikos, please.
I was expecting that question, although we didn't know each other. There is a longer story behind it. And I wanted to remind you some crucial moments of that story. February 1823, there was a tavern in the center of London, off the Strand, Arundel Street, where the Institute of Strategic Studies functions today, if I'm not wrong, my lord, called Crown and Anchor. Under the initiative of a British MP, John Bowring, and a former officer of the British Army who had fought in Spain, a Greek committee was established to support the Greek War of Independence, raising funds by subscription for military supplies. Among the members of that committee were Lord Byron, Jeremy Bentham, David Ricardo. They held weekly meetings and they worked very hard for the Greek War of Independence. In the aftermath of the Balkan Wars in 1913, another committee was created in London, the Anglo-Hellenic League, among others by Ioannis Gennadios. He was the co-founder. That Anglo-Hellenic committee established the Korais Chair in King's College London. It published the Anglo-Hellenic Review, Anglo-Ελληνική Επιθεώρηση, which was an extremely important literary review appearing in the 50s and 60s. The director of that review was the late Professor Savidis. In 1979, I suppose before the issue of the repatriation, of the reunification of the marbles was put, there was an appeal addressed to the British public by that league, the Save the Acropolis appeal, and apparently they managed to collect £80,000. Today, the Anglo-Hellenic Committee still exists and awards the Stephen Rancimal Award to books published in English referring to Greece. And I would remind the audience, my lord, that one of the founders, of the first members of that committee, was at the time an MP, a British MP, Hugh Law. Last but not least, I suppose you are all aware of Oxfam, the NGO which brings humanitarian aid all over the world today. It has more than 1,000 shops all over the world. It was established in 1942 in Oxford. The founders were Quakers and academics, and the first meeting took place at the old library of University Church of St. Mary the Virgin. The aim of Oxfam was to grant help to starving citizens of occupied Greece. Politically speaking, it is important to note that starvation in Greece was not owed not only to the Nazi occupiers, it was owed also to the Allied blockade of Greece. And then there was pressure to the British government to allow food relief through the blockade. So there is a long precedent, and we believe that with the kind of action we are trying to develop within this project, and please note, this is not a government action, this is a civil society action. We are trying to create the conditions for which would allow a fruitful negotiation and finally an agreement.
I regret we're actually at time, so I'm going to close out, but we do have a reception following this event, and we welcome you all to joining us. So just in closing, if I may, we recognize that the final decision is, of course, between the Greek and British authorities. And we welcome the significant steps that both have taken in resolving this issue. The Parthenon project has set out a win-win solution to help facilitate these discussions. And of course, we are one of many efforts underway. The win-win solution puts forward what we hope are generating mutually beneficial ideas that could form part of a deal that ensures the complete and permanent reunification of the sculptures back here in Athens. What is clear from today is that there is a willingness to find a solution, that there is mutual respect between the Greek and the British people and governments. We are in a unique moment in history, and we hope that we can grasp this moment. We thank you very much for your participation, for your attendance, to our speakers for joining us, and please join us for reception and stay in touch through our Twitter feed. Thank you so much.